The focal point of our discussion today is going to be a mechilta at the end of Parshas B'Shalach. But before we get to the mechilta, let's just make the following introduction. The Torah says, Zachar es asher asolacha Amalek. In the context of the mitzvah milchama against Amalek, we find something very unique, which we don't find in the mitzvah milchama against other nations of the world, and that is the command of Zachar. And the Mechilta points out that it's not enough that you fulfill lo tishkach, but the Torah also adds a positive command, Zachar. And the difference is the following. If it would be lo tishkach, as a lo taseh, which would prohibit shichacha, then there would be no need to read a parsha in the Torah. Just remind yourself mentally of Amalek. But when the Torah gives you a positive command, Zachar, that goes beyond lo tishkach. It's not enough that you remember Amalek. There's got to be something positive. And what do we need? We need Zachar b'peh. And Chazal understood that Zachar b'peh means to learn the halachos about Amalek, to study the laws of the milchama against Amalek, the details about who to kill and how to kill Amalek. So that what we're going to embark on today is a fulfillment of the mitzvah of Zachar. Because as we said before, Zachar entails limud halachos hanogos leikar milchemes Amalek, mechias Amalek. Okay. Now, what does the Mechilta say? The Mechilta writes in the name of Rabbi Lazar that HaKadosh Baruch Hu took a shvuah and he held on to the kisei kavod because shvuah requires nekitas chayfetz. You have to hold on to something of kedusha, usually a sefer Torah, but in this case, HaKadosh Baruch Hu holds on to the kisei kavod, and he takes a shvuah that although we will accept a member of any of the nations of the world as a ger, however, the exception is Amalek. La Amalek ula beso. Beso means the descendants of Amalek. Lo yikablu. We will not accept their candidacy for gerus. An Amaleki, according to the Mechilta, cannot be a candidate for gerus. And this is a shvuah that HaKadosh Baruch Hu took as he held on to the kisei kavod. And has the Mechilta know such a thing? The Mechilta quotes a pasuk in Shmuel Beis. In the very first chapter of Shmuel Beis, the pasuk says, "Vayomer David el Hanar Hamagidlo." So David encounters a young man who answers the following question. David says, "Eze miata, where are you coming from?" Vayomer, and the Nar responds, "Ben ish ger Amaleki anochi." I am the son of a ger Amaleki. My father is an Amaleki, and he is a ger. He is a convert to Judaism. And the Mechilta says that David put him to death. Why? Nizkar David al mashenemer leMoshe. That the original command to Moshe was, Mi beso shel Amalek lo yikablu. We will not accept gerim from the lineage of Amalek. Vayomer lo David, Damchal Roshecha, you have brought your own death. Hipicha inabacha, your own admission has boomeranged against you. Meaning the very moment that you identified yourself as a Ben Ish Ger Amaleki, therefore you're Chayiv Misa. Says the Mechilta, L'kach Nemar, that's what it means in the pasuk in B'Shalach, Milchama L'Hashem B'Amalek Midar Dar. every generation. So that Moshe Rabbeinu was told, and he announced it, that we do not accept Gerim from Amalek, and therefore, even if all of the Amalekim were to convert to Judaism, it would be invalid, it would be disqualified, and they still have the status of Amalek. And therefore, the war against Amalek continues. Midar dar, and that's why David is going to kill this Nar who identifies himself as Ben Ish Ger Amaleki, because we don't accept Gerim from Amalek. So you, by your own admission, you're still an Amaleki, and therefore the Milchama Hashem Ba'Amalek Midar dar, Moshe Rabbeinu has already made the announcement, which was transmitted through the generations, that Amalekim, even after the Gerus is invalid, and we will have to put them to death. So it comes out two things from this Mechilta. One is a Halacha, a new principle in Halacha, namely that we don't accept Gerim from Amalek. And secondly, a new interpretation of the Pasuk in Shmuel Aleph. Namely, that the reason why David HaMelech had this Nar, had him killed, is because of the mitzvah Mechias Amalek. And that's why David says, I remember that in the parsha Mechias Amalek, Moshe Rabbeinu was commanded to keep this Milchama going on Midar Dar, and therefore I'm going to have you killed, because the Milchama continues Midar Dar. And there's no such thing as Gerus. So what does it mean when this Nar, according to the Pasuk, testifies and identifies himself as a Ben Ger? Ben Ish Ger Amaleki Anochi. But the answer is that you could talk about Gerus from now until doomsday, but the Halacha doesn't recognize that. And the Gerus is null and void, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu took a shvua that we can take Gerim from every nation, but not Amalek. No Gerim from Amalek. Now the Mechilta is very, very difficult, because how can you possibly fit this into the pasuk? Namely, the premise that David had this ger killed because of the mitzvah of Amalek. Look at the psukim. It says, after the Nar identified himself, Vayomer ben ish ger Amalek Yonoch, Vayomer loved David. David said to him, before he had him killed, Ech lo yaresa l'shloach yadcha l'shaches es Mashiach Hashem. How could it be that you did not hesitate to destroy the life of the Mashiach? Mashiach here means the anointed one, which is Shaul. Vayikra David liechad min anarim, vayomer gesh pagabo vayikau vayomos, vayomer love David domchal roshecha ki picha inabach lemar anochi mosasi es Mashiach Hashem. The psukim are absolutely explicit. David didn't kill him because he was an Amaleki. David killed him because, by his own admission, he had murdered Shaul HaMelech. And a murderer has to be put to death. So again, if we ask the question in a broad sense, why did David HaMelech have this Nar killed? Was it because of the mitzvah of Amalek? Or was it because of Ritzicha, because the Nar was guilty of Ritzicha? The answer is clearly in the pasuk. Domchal roshcha picha inabach lemar anoki masasi es Mashiach Hashem. David killed the Amaleki, this Nar, because he was a Rotzeach, who's chayav misa, not because of the mitzvah of Mechias Amalek. And this question is asked by the Torah Tmima and by many others. Not only that, what's odd about the language of the Mechilta, if you read it carefully, is that the Mechilta is of the opinion that we don't accept Gerim from Amalek. David killed the Nar Amaleki to fulfill the mitzvah Mechias Amalek. So take a look at the Mechilta. The Mechilta quotes the pasuk, "Damchal roshecha, ki picha anabecha." David declares, "I will take your life because you yourself, by your own admission, brought about your death." Which means, according to the Mechilta, picha inabecha, because you're an Amaleki. You yourself admit that you're an Amaleki. But look at the end of the pasuk. It says, "Picha hana b'cha leimar anochi mosasi es Mashiach Hashem." And David kills this Nar because he killed Shaul. So it's very strange. The Mechilta brings a raya from a pasuk, and that very pasuk leads us to the exact opposite conclusion of the Mechilta. Now, if the Mechilta wanted to say, to understand that David had killed him because he was an Amaleki, the Mechilta should have quoted a different pasuk. It just said, "Ben ish ger Amaleki anochi," and then Vayakeu Vayovos. But instead, the Mechilta quotes the pasuk, "Picha ancha b'chal leimar anochi mosasi es Mashiach Hashem," that by your own confession, you murdered Shaul. So the Mechilta is trying to prove that David fulfilled the mitzvah Mechias Amalek, Midor Dar, from a pasuk which says explicitly that David killed the Nar Amaleki because he had killed Shaul. He was a Rotzeach. You know what? If we open up Chazal, the Gemaros, especially Gemara Yevamis, we really don't understand this episode of David having the Nar killed, because the Gemara establishes in Yevamis Daf Chafei and Beis, Ein Adam Mesim Atzmo Rasha. A person could not incriminate himself. His confession is thrown out of court. And that's based on the principle of Karov Pasul Yedus, the Adam Karov Eitel Atzmo. So if a person testifies about himself, he cannot incriminate himself. Now, if David had this Nar killed because he had murdered Shaul, where was testimony? Where were the Eidim against this Nar that he killed Shaul? The pasuk indicates that Picha Ina Bach, meaning your own admission. We only know that you killed Shaul from your own confession. And then David has him killed. What about Ein Adam Mesim Atzmo Rasha? A person cannot testify against himself to incriminate himself. We cannot rely on a person's own confession and then put him to death. So how could David HaMelech have killed this Nar based on what's called Hodas Atzmo? In Dini Mamanos, in monetary law, Hodas Atzmo is Kimea Edim Don. That's called Hodas Baldin. It's a sugi at the beginning of Bava Metzia. But in criminal law and in punitary law, when we punish a person in the courts, we can't rely on a person's own confession because we need edus, and a person cannot testify against himself. Ein Adam Mesim Atzmo Rasha. Very difficult parsha here. So again, we have the Mechilta that David had him killed because he was an Amaleki for the mitzvah of Mechias Amalek. That's something different. But to kill him, as the Psukim indicated, have him killed, he was condemned to death based on his own confession, that's very difficult. Ila Rotzeach, because he confessed and there's no other exterior independent testimony against him. It's against the sugya in Yevamis.
This is Rav's question?
No, this is a question that is asked by the Rambam and the Ralbag. And we'll get to the Rambam in just a minute.
By the way, I wanted to interject that The Gemara in Sanhedrin Sadivav Amud Bet says that descendants of Haman were in Torah and Bnei Brak. So it seems that there's a makloket as to whether or not we could accept Gerim from Amalek.
I hear the voice of a shade somewhere. I don't know where it's coming from. Oh, there it is. Okay, great. There's really a person behind that voice. But it's a brilliant question. How does the Mechilta make any sense? The Mechilta is assuming that HaKadosh Baruch Hu took a shvua, held on to the Kisei HaKavod, that we don't accept Gerim from Amalek. And not only that, based on that, the Mechilta interprets the entire parsha of David having the each nar Amaleki put to death because of the mitzvah of Amalek. There is no Geris by Amalek. Once an Amaleki, always an Amalek. But yet the Gemara tells us that Bnei Banav Shel Haman lomdim Torah b'Bnei Brak. We'll get to the Gemara very shortly. So how do we reconcile all this?
David was the king here. It's Mishpat HaMelech. He can do what he wants.
Excellent. Okay, so that's the Rambam. I see that. I'm trying to figure out if you went through this article that David sent out or you didn't.
No.
Oh, okay. Because I was gonna ask you if you saw the next page in the article that we're trying to study. But let's ask another question, and then we'll get to this Rambam that you mentioned. The Gemara in Sanhedrin, Ayin Ches Amud Aleph, establishes that a horig is a treifa pot. What does that mean? If a person is already in a state in which he cannot survive, he has injuries to vital internal organs, and it's just a matter of time before he expires. If somebody were to murder such a treifa, he is exempt from condemnation as a murderer, meaning we cannot punish him. Ha-horig is a treifa potter. And that's codified in the Shulchan Aruch. Now, in the case of the Nar, in the story in Shmuel Aleph, the Nar, again, we only know this from his own admission. We have no other independent evidence. Vayomer Elai Shaul, the Nar says that Shaul told him, Amodna Alai, Umosasani, Ki echzani hashevet. In other words, I'm already a treifa. I'm about to die. Please kill me before the enemies get a hold of me. And the Nar responds, and he says, Amod Olav, I stood over him, Vamosehu, and I destroyed him, I killed him. Ki adati, ki lo yichyeh, achareinu, achareinu follow. You remember that Shaul fell on the Cherev, and the Nar Amaleki says, I knew that he's not going to survive, and I fulfilled his request to put him to death. So it's clear from the pasuk that if the only information and testimony we have against this Nar Amaleki is what the Nar himself, by his own confession, said, then he killed a treifa. The pasuk is explicit. Lo yichya achrei nefolo. And if that be the case, the Gemara in Sanhedrin Ayin Ches establishes that a horig is a treifa potter. So again, if we go with the sheet of the Mechilta that David had him killed because he was an Amaleki, and that's predicated on the assumption that there's no gerus that's valid. In the case of Amalek, nicha. We have here clearly a case of an Amaleki, and we have a mitzvah of Amalek. However, the psukim indicate explicitly that David HaMelech had him killed because he killed Shaul HaMelech. And that's what it says in the pasuk. And yet, Eino D'Meisim Atzma Rocha, and a horig is a treifa potter. Very difficult. So we're up to now page 163. And I see that, at least on the surface of it, David joined us. David Spiegel. David, is that you?
Yeah.
David, do you want to dedicate this year L'Zecher, your father, Zichron Livrocha?
Sure.
What again? Remind me. I'm sorry. I could open up the phone, but I closed the phone so it wouldn't bother us.
Avram and Moshe Zelig.
Avram ben Moshe Zelig.
Thank you.
So we're on page 163 now, and we're going to introduce the Rambam. The Rambam says in the 18th chapter of Hilchos Sanhedrin, how is it that David put this nar to death as a rotzeach, al pi odas atzmo? So the Rambam gives two answers. They're very similar for our purposes today. And the Rambam says, Horas shah haisa, o din malchus haya. So we're going to focus on Horas shah. And the one who expands upon this idea, the Rambam, is the Ralbag. The Ralbag in his commentary in Shmuel Aleph writes that David Horeg es anar, machmas Horas shah, v'taima, and what was the reasoning behind this Horas shah? Shelo yakelu with a kuf, ha'anoshim l'shloch yadam b'malchus. And the Ralbag explains that Shaul HaMelech, as the first Melech, the concept of kingship was still somewhat foreign to the Jewish nation. There was no steadfast commitment and acceptance of the Melech. It was a process. And at this point in history, David HaMelech felt that it was critical to go beyond the law with the license called Horas Shah and put this Ger Amaleki to death based on his own confession that he killed Shaul HaMelech. And we're going to rely on his confession as a Horas Shah to get the word out, Shelo yakelu b'Mashiach Hashem. Mashiach Hashem meaning the Melech. And if David HaMelech killed this Nar Amaleki as a Rotzeach, not because he was an Amaleki, but because he had killed Shaul, and we know that by his own admission, and we're relying on the principle of Horas Shah, then this all makes sense according to the Rambam's own shita in Perkei Hilchos Malachim Halacha Vav, that we are makabel gerim from Amalek. So you have now two shitos here that are mutually exclusive. On the one hand, you have the shita, the mechilta that we started with. Mechilta at the end of the Halacha insists that we don't accept gerim from Amalek, and that's why David HaMelech, to fulfill the mitzvah Mechias Amalek, put this nar to death. We pointed out that it's a wonderful shita, but it's not in the psukim. The psukim are explicit that David HaMelech killed him because he had killed the Mashiach Hashem. So now we have another opinion that David HaMelech killed the nar because he was a Rotzeach and he killed Shaul. But we have to introduce the Rambam of Horas Shah, because otherwise, how do you rely on someone's own confession and self-incrimination to have him put to death? Ein adam meisimat Rasha. And perhaps we could tie this together with the Rambam Shita that we do accept gerim from Amalek, so that there was no mitzvah of Mechias Amalek because this man was the son of a Ger Amaleki, and a Ger Amaleki is a Jew, and if he's a Jew, then we don't have a mitzvah of Mechias Amalek. And the only possible justification for David putting this man to death would be the fact that he was a Rotzeach. You'll ask me, ain't on the Mesa Matz Horas Shah? The answer is Horas Shah. Now, the Chidah and many others bring a proof from the Rambam, as you mentioned earlier. And I don't know your name, Avi?
Hesslinger.
Your first name is Avi?
Yeah.
That's a little easier for me. Okay, so as Avi pointed out, the Gemara tells us in a number of places in Gittin and Sanhedrin that Mibnei Banav Shel Haman Lamdu Torah b'Bnei Brak. And the Chidah wants to bring this as a proof that there's a machlokes between the Bavli and the Mechilta, and the Rambam decides to paskin like the Bavli against the Mechilta. And the Bavli clearly indicates that we do accept Gerim from Amalek. Now, if we accept Gerim from Amalek, why did David Amalek have this person killed? Hence, the Rambam invokes the principle of Horat Shah, because we were makabel his own admission in order to protect the institution of Malchus. However, Rav Yosef Engel and others try to defend the approach of the Mechilta and reconcile the Mechilta with the Sugis HaBavli. We don't accept Gerim from Amalek. And that's the sheet of the Mechilta. And many Rishonim pass like the Mechilta against the Rambam. We don't accept Gerim from Amalek. That's a generally accepted view. You'll ask me, if the Mechilta is right, what are we going to do with the Bavli? And the answer is, this is based on a principle in the Gemara in Yevamos, that the yichus of a ben Noach comes through the father. So what does that mean? Imagine the following scenario. A woman is born to an Amaleki, she's a Bas Amaleki, and she marries a Knani. What's the status of the child? The child is a Knani because his father is a Knani. So you have a mixed marriage amongst the Goyim. We always think the mixed marriage is only for Jews, but it's also for Goyim. And the child of this mixed marriage is not an Amaleki. It's a Knani because even though his maternal grandfather is an Amaleki, but his paternal grandfather is a Knani. So when the Gemara says that mibnei banav, the word banim here should be used in a generic sense to include children, but what it means is we're talking about a female child. So bnei banav shel Haman means the daughter of Haman had a child from another nation, meaning her husband was from another nation. Let's call him a Knani for lack of a, and therefore he has the status of a Knani, and we accept him as a ger. That's the way we can interpret the Gemara, so that even if we accept the principle of the Rambam, of the Mechilta, I meant to say, that we're not Makabel Gerim from Amalek, in this case, B'nai Banav Shel Haman, which is really B'nai Benosav Shel Haman, they're not Amalek. And therefore we Makabel them as Gerims. Okay. But now we want to get back to the Mechilta. The Mechilta claims that David HaMelech had this Nar Amaleki killed because of the mitzvah Mechias Amalek. And we pointed out that it's against the Psukim. And even the very pasuk that the Mechilta quotes as a raya, that Picha Inabach, that pasuk ends with the fact that you killed Shaul HaMelech. And that's the confession, the base of which David HaMelech had him killed. So how could the Mechilta understand the parsha? Okay. So for this, we have to learn the Sefer HaChinuch. The Sefer HaChinuch in two places writes that Goy nerag alpi hodas atzmo. That there are two sets of halachas, and the requirements of Eidus in Yisrael, in a Beis Shel Yisrael, are different than the requirements of Eidus and the qualifications and the kashrus of Eidim with regard to a Ben Noach. And therefore, a Ben Noach is believed to condemn himself. But Yisrael has a psul of Adam Karvei Talatzmo, etc., but not a Ben Noach. That's what it says in the Sefer HaChinuch, one of the Rishonim. Oh, if this be the case, then perhaps we could say the following, that according to the Mechilta, the reason David HaMelech had him killed, this Nar Amaleki, is because he was a Rotzeach. That's explicit in the pasuk. The Mechilta can't deny the pasuk. But the Mechilta derives from this parsha that we cannot accept Gerim from Amalek, because the Mechilta asked the following question: Ein Adam meis al pi atzmo, al pi hadas atzmo. So again, if David HaMelech killed the Nar Amaleki because he was a murderer by his own confession and no Eidim, Ein Adam meis al atzmo rasha, how can we accept it? But the answer is because this Nar Amaleki is not a Yisrael, but rather he's a guy. And as we said in the name of the Sefer HaChinuch, a guy is Neman al Atzmo, and he's killed al pi oras hodas piv. But wait a second. So Mechilta asks the following question: is this Nar Amaleki a Jew or a non-Jew? Well, he identifies himself as Ben Ish Ger, meaning his father was a Ger. That would make him a Jew. And then once again, how could David HaMelech rely on hodas piv and have him killed? And we're not operating with the Rambam Shita of Haras Shah. The answer must be, says the Mechilta, that this Nar Amaleki is not a Jew. Why isn't he a Jew? His father's a Ger. The answer is because we don't accept Gerim from Amalek. And that was the shvua that HaKadosh Baruch Hu took at the time of Moshe Rabbeinu, that Milchamal Hashem Amalek midar dar, and Moshe Rabbeinu saw how HaKadosh Baruch Hu grabbed off to the Kisei HaKavod. I don't know if he saw it, but he knew about it. And he took the shvua that we will never accept Gerim from Amalek. So the Gerus of the father of this Nar is not a valid Gerus. Hence, the status of the Nar is that of a guy. Hence, according to Sefer HaChinuch, Goy nerag al pio das atzmo. Seinach hinami, he was put to death by David HaMelech because of Ritzicha, but not based on a Rasha, but rather based on the principle of the Sefer HaChinuch and the combination of that principle with the Mechilta, that there's no Gerim amongst Amalek, and therefore his status is that of a guy. And as a guy, we accept his confession and his self-incrimination, and we put him to death. And if this be the case, then when the Mechilta quotes the pasuk Picha Inav Onabacha Lemar Anochi Matasias Mashiach Hashem, it means Einochinami. Exactly what it says is what it means. That David says, your mouth condemned yourself by self-incrimination, and therefore Domchal Roshcha, and that proves that there's no Gerim for Amal. That David HaMelech had him killed based on his own Picha Ina Bach, which means your own self-incrimination. It means that the Geris was not a valid Geris, because otherwise Hodas Piv, with regard to rishus, any criminal act, is saying other Mesamatz or Russia. It can only be because amongst the Goyim, with regard to Goyim, is Akum is Nerag al pi Hodas Atzmo. If this be the case, then maybe we can have an answer to another question that we asked earlier, and that question is, how could David HaMelech have this Nar killed as a Rotzeach when Shaul HaMelech was a treifa, and a horigas a treifa's partner? But the answer is, as the Rambam codifies in the 9th chapter of Hilchos Malachim, with regard to a Ben Noach is chayav misa, even if he kills a treifa. And by the way, I'm just talking to myself for a minute. A Ben Noach is also killed if he kills an Ubar. Which means, by the way, again, I'm just talking to myself out loud, that if a non-Jewish physician is about to abort an Ubar, then we could kill him, because this is not so politically correct, but we could have him killed on the spot as a Rodef. Okay, anyway, that's just on the side. Now, we have the following question on the Mechilta. Everything seems to fit into place except for one piece of the puzzle. The Mechilta says that midar dar, that David HaMelech when he heard this Amaleki, this Nar Amaleki, and we're assuming that the Gerus is not valid, he reminded himself of the Shvuah that HaKadosh Baruch Hu took to Moshe Rabbeinu midar dar, that we don't accept Gerim from Amalek. If that be the case, why does David HaMelech say, I'm going to put you to death because you're a Rotzeach? This is not necessary at all. David HaMelech is obligated to put this man to death because of the mitzvah of Amalek. Do you follow, Rabbi? So we went from one extreme to the other. At the beginning, we said that according to the Mechilta, David HaMelech had this man put to death because of the mitzvah of Amalek, and that's midar dar. And ein mekablim gerim Amalek. But then we say, but the Psukim say otherwise, and they contradict the Mechilta. It must be that David HaMelech put him to death as a Rotzeach. It's Hodas Atzmo. The answer is he's a guy. And with regard to a guy, we have the principle of the Chinuch that Ben Noach Nerag Al Pi Hodas Atzmo. But if that be the case, why did David HaMelech put him to death as a Rotzeach? He was obligated to put him to death as an Amaleki for the mitzvah of Mechias Amalek. And now we're up to page 166 in the text. And we have a Rambam in Minyan HaMitzvahs. And this Rambam is very controversial, only because of the Sefer HaChinuch. The Sefer HaChinuch is famous as saying that if you meet up with an Amaleki, you're obligated to put him to death. The Rambam says no. The mitzvah of Mechias Amalek is not an obligation that's incumbent upon you, on Ruvain, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, but rather it's on the tzibur. The tzibur, as a community, klal tzibur, are obligated to put the Amaleki to death, but not the Yachid. So the Rambam takes issue with the Sefer HaChinuch, who writes in Mitzvah Taf Reish Daled that the mitzvah of Amalek is incumbent upon every single Yachid. So you meet up with an Amaleki. My father once told me that he was sitting at a wedding with Rav Moshe Bick. I don't know if you know the name. He was one of the great poskim in America. And there were a group of my father's chaverim, his rabbinic friends. So they were looking at a waiter who was serving at this wedding. And they asked Rav Chaim Bick, what would you do, Rav Moshe Bick, excuse me, what would you do if we told you that this man over here is an Amaleki? So Rav Moshe Bick said, I would take out my sword and kill him on the spot. Because Rav Moshe Bick Paskin like to say for Achinu, that the chova of Mechias Amalek is on the Yachid. But the Rambam disagrees. The Rambam says clearly that it's a mitzvah mutelas al hatzibur. Now, if we assume that the Mechilta agrees with the Rambam that the mitzvah of Mechias Amalek is incumbent on the tzibur, then David HaMelech is a Yachid. And therefore, as a Yachid, he's not obligated to have this Amaleki, who's an Amaleki because the Shita Mechilta that we don't accept Berim from Amalek, put to death because there's no mitzvah Mechias Amalek. So therefore, David HaMelech's only option and only obligation to put this man to death is because of Ritzicha, because he killed Shaul HaMelech. And even though we only know that from Odas Piv, and even though Shaul HaMelech was already a treifa, but nevertheless, we put him to death because these laws of Hodas Piv and treifa only apply to Yisrael. And the Mechilta holds that this Ben Nar Ben Ish Amaleki is an Amaleki because we don't recognize and validate the heiress of his father. Therefore, as a guy, we can put him to death based on Hodas Piv, and even if he killed the treifa. And that's going to be the sheet of the Mechilta. So just to summarize, the Mechilta agrees, and it's explicit in the Psukim, that David HaMelech had this Nar killed because Picha Inabach, by your own admission, you killed Shaul HaMelech, and you have to be put to death. The Mechilta is going to have to ask the question, what does this have to do with the fact that he's a Ger Amaleki? And the Mechilta, in a very bold way, proves from this story that there's a mitzvah Mechias Amalek, even by Gerim, even if an Amaleki somehow gets some sort of a bested together to be Megayerim. What does that have to do with this Ger Amaleki? I mean, he was killed because he was a Rotzeach. He killed Sholem. But the answer is we can't kill him if we accept his Gerus, because by Yisrael, Hodas Piv is not acceptable. Not only that, we don't kill a person who killed a Treifa. So we're going to have to assume that this man is a guy. And with regard to a guy, we go to Sefer Chinuch and Adam Nerag al Piatzma. And with regard to a guy, he's Nerag even if he killed a Treifa. But the Mechilta asks the obvious question, why is he a guy? He's a Ben Ger. But the answer is his Gerus is invalid.
So what do we do with the Gemara
Which Gemara?
in Sanhedrin that says that descendants of Haman were in Torah and Bnei Brak?
Correct. So that's what we said before, that even though we don't accept Aaron from Amalek, but if the mother is the Amaleki and the father is a Knani, then he can be Miskaya. So the Bnei Banav Shel Haman, we're not talking about through the paternal lineage, because there's no Geirus by Ben Noach, according to the Mechilta and most Rishonim, but rather what the Gemara has in mind, as we saw, I just want to say, Peshem Omer, the Marsham, and the Rabbi Yosef Engel, they all say that that was a reference to a maternal grandson, meaning that his mother was an Amaleki, his grandfather on his mother's side was an Amaleki, but his grandfather on his father's side, or his father for that matter, was a Canaan.
Although I did see an opinion that it's just simply a makloket.
There are two ways of interpreting that Gemara, all depending upon whether you accept Aaron from Amalek, which is a tremendous machlokas rishonim.
But
There's
really,
one question that I want to leave you with before we go on, and that is that the Mechilta seems to indicate that this whole discussion about David killing the Amaleki, and David reminded himself of what Hashem said to Moshe Rabbeinu when he took the Shvuah, is based on the pasuk Midar Dar. So it's a little bit odd that the Mechilta is invoking the pasuk Midar Dar, meaning the simple pshat of Midar Dar would mean the mitzvah Mechias Amalek, but now we're saying that the psukim indicate that David had him killed because he was a Rotzeach. So what's the pasuk Midar Dar? But maybe Midar Dar is just indicative of the fact that there always will be Amalekim because there's no Geris by Amalek. Maybe that's what the Mechilta means by quoting the pasuk Midar Dar. Okay.
You couldn't use the pasuk to explain that David was saying, how could it be that Shaul was killed, and that the idea that
I don't know what you mean by Shaul. Shaul committed suicide. What do you mean?
I know that he said when he was saying that, he said that he killed the Mashiach Hashem, right? Which was Shaul, correct? That the reason he utilizes the pasuk with regards to Amalek is because that was his downfall. The whole concept of how could Shaul be killed in any way, that's what he was saying. Amalek, his not being fulfilling his role in destroying Amalek, that was what David was talking about. Not necessarily this guy himself, but the whole concept of not being, following through in what he had to do as a Melech, as Melech Yisrael. You understand what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, I think there's a communication gap here, though, because the psukim indicate that David HaMelech put him to death because picha ina b'cha, because of your own admission. That's why we have to kill you. As I state in Pasuk. Now, you can ask a philosophical question about the downfall of Shaul. And that would be a great drasha, on Shabbos before Musa. But I just want to know, the Pasuk is telling me why David HaMelech had this man killed. And the Pasuk indicates clearly because you, my friend, and Er Hamaleki admit, Picha Inabacha, Shehimasa, that you killed the Mashiach Hashem. And you're Rotzeach. The Mechilta says that only makes sense if you assume that then this person, this Nar, was a guy, which means that his gerus, his father's gerus, was invalid. Now, I believe that you have until the end of this chapter, am I right? At least until 169, and even a little bit beyond that. The end of this chapter that begins on page 166 is addressing a different issue. And that is a Mishnah in Masechta Yadayim. The Mishnah in Masechta Yadayim says that Ola Sancherev Melech Ashur ubilbel es kol ha'umos. Meaning we no longer today can identify a person's nationality because there's all this intermarriage between the nations. So, for example, in the case of Amalek, if you would want to apply the mitzvah of Amalek, of Mechias Amalek today, you're going to have a problem with this Mishnah in Yadayim, which says that Basan Cheru Bilbel Sa'umos. Who is Amalek? How do you identify Amalek when all the nations are mixed together? And this becomes problematic because the pasuk says Milchamal Hashem b'Amalek midar dar. What do you mean midar dar? How can God write that in His eternal book of books? La netzach nitzachim, that midar dar. What do you mean midar dar? The whole concept business of Amalek is if I can use the phrase "Ma'ida hava hava." I mean, it's past, it's history. Basan cherevu bilbel sa'umos. And the Pella is that if you look in Rabbeinu Ovadia Mibar Tnura, he writes a letter to his father. I'd like to calculate what year it is, but it's about 5 centuries ago. And in this letter, he speaks about the Armenians, which I guess at that point they were very cruel to the Jewish people, and he calls them Amalekim. And this letter became very, was popularized because they thought that the Bartanura, Rabbeinu Ovadia, was asking that today we can identify Amalekim, that nation, which is called the Armanim, the Armenians, they are Amalekim. Others say that he didn't mean that seriously. He was just telling them that they smell like Amalek, if you know what I mean. However, the Hegyonei Halacha quotes Rav Soloveitchik, which I know for many years, even before the Hegyonei Halacha. And this was a statement made by Rav Moshe Soloveitchik, the Rav's father, regarding reparations. You know that about the time of, or early in the history of the state of Israel, the government of Israel was receiving and passing down to many, many Holocaust survivors major funds that were coming from Germany as Ki'ilu reparations. I don't know what to call them, maybe compensation. I don't know what word you want to use because no word is going to be appropriate here for what they did to the Jews. And this created a whole stir. Now, one of the objections was emotional. And that was, we don't want to give the Germans, Yamach Shemam, a sense of quieting down their guilt conscience. We feel a little guilty, write a check. But Rav Moshe Soloveitchik had a halachic objection.
Could have been Rav Moshe Soloveitchik. He died in the early 40s.
Oh, you're right, right. So Rav Soloveitchik, based on his father's Torah, had a halachic objection. Why? Because Rav Moshe had a Rambam in Hilchos Malachim, and he was medayik in the Rambam. This is Perek Hey, Halacha Daled and Halacha Hey. Halacha Daled, mitzvah saseh lahachrim shivas ha'amim shenemar hachrim tachim v'chol neshama lo tchaya kol neshama. And then the Rambam adds 3 words: ukvar avad zichram. We no longer have a mitzvah to destroy the 7 nations, says the Rambam, because we don't know where they are. And this is based on the Mishnah Yodayim Basan Cherevu Bilbil Sa'umos. In the very next halacha, the Rambam writes that we have a mitzvah of Mechias Amalek. Mitzvah saseh li abed zecher Amalek, shenemar timcha zecher Amalek. And the Rambam omits the 3 key words that he mentioned with regard to Shiva Amamin of Kvar Ovad Zichron. So Rav Moshe Soloveitchik said that he believes that the Rambam holds that Amalek is not necessarily a genetic nation. It's not a matter of biology. It's not a matter of father, son, but it's a matter of a nation, whatever nation it is, that declares war and an intention to annihilate the Jewish people. Any nation in any time that stands up and declares, let's destroy and annihilate the Jewish people, by definition, al pi halacha, that nation has the status of Amalek. Hence, we're not allowed to take anything from Amalek. Mishar v'yatzeh, we can't take any shalal, any booty from the mitzvah of Mechias Amalek. It's all us. It's like a cherem. And therefore, Rav Moshe came to the conclusion
Not Rav Moshe.
that Rav Moshe Soloveitchik,
No, he died 10 years earlier.
he came to the conclusion, let me just finish my sentence, that any nation that declares we will annihilate the Jewish people has the status of Amalek.
Okay.
And his son, my Rebbe Rav Soloveitchik, said that he believes that that certainly would apply to the Germans who declared, let's annihilate the Jewish people, as we call it, the final solution of Hitler.
Would that change for a new generation of Germans then?
Could be that the next generation of Germans would not apply. For example, today, I mean, you'll correct me because I'm not politically astute, but from the best of my knowledge, Austria today, which are also Nazis, they are the best friends of Israel in all of Europe. So maybe the Austrians today, or at least some of them, are no longer Amalek, even according to Rav Moshe Soloveitchik. But be that as it may, there was a whole debate about accepting reparations from the Germans. Rav Soloveitchik himself changed his opinion later on when he realized that, like, the state of Israel was built on reparations. I mean, those who know the history of it, there are roads in Israel that facilitated the defeat of our Arab enemies during the wars that were built from reparations.
Whole industries.
And therefore, even though you might argue that this is a question of being nene from the possessions of Amalek, but nevertheless, we have to find some sort of al-Rashah to allow us to build the state of Israel, because again, maybe today it doesn't sound so contemporary, but at that point in the history of the state, it was absolutely crucial. I mean, the state was poor as a church mouse. They needed those reparations. But anyway,
Well, if it
that's
was
just a little
Pikuach
piece of
Nefesh, if so,
a little
maybe-
piece of history.
Maybe it was the Pikuach Nefesh. It's not one of the big
Right.
three.
That's what I'm saying. So that's already a different discussion, but this is very fascinating. Well, the Milchama Lashem Ba'Amalek Midar Dar means not the genetic Amalek, because the Milchama is against the Ruach of Amalek, the spirit of Amalek. And any nation that has the spirit of Amalek halachically becomes Amalek. Now, I'm not telling you that this is, the final word on the issue, but I just want to tell you that there is such an opinion, which would justify the conclusion that even in our time, there may be a mitzvah of Mechias Amalek, which is it's a pretty radical position.
I have a question.
Yeah, David?
Okay, so you're not supposed to take anything from the possessions of Amalek after they're all killed, right? The Shaul. But if they willingly give it to you, that's not quite the same thing.
Could be you're right. I don't know. I would plead the fifth on that one. I have to research that. But you may be right. I don't know. You want to open up the Rambam? It's Perkei Milchus Malach,
I'll play that. I'll try and take a look.
if you get a chance.
But
I
To say also there's a mitzvah Mechias Amalek without a melech is also a problem. Plus you're not your sister. There's a bunch of reasons why. You
Right,
can't
certainly
kill
according to the Rambam. The Rambam holds the Chovas Tzibur. So you may need a melech in order to effectuate
Right. There's no
a
melech,
Melchama on the Tzibur. Right, the melech himself is going to.
Right. But it's in Hedron. You can't do it anyway. So it's not like you can take a weapon and go kill somebody you determine to be an Amaleki. Can't do that.
Right, but if you hold like the chinuch, that the chov of Mechias Amalek is on the Yachid, that might be a whole different story.
Even though there's no Sanhedrin and no melech.
Could be.
Really? Okay.
Could be that according to the chinuch, there are two mitzvahs. There's one mitzvah that's incumbent on the Yachid and one on the Tzibur.
Okay. I've actually a similar word quickly as an aside. I've actually a similar word by Moav and Ammon, right? Because the thing is, when we say you can't marry into Moav because Halacha is built in the Or, right? So Balak himself was not from Moav. Genetically, he wasn't the Moav. He was Midiani. So the question is, what do you mean? So the answer is because his behavior became Moav. Same sort of idea.
Right. So just to finish up, because it's getting pretty late now, we're going to talk now about a concept that you're all familiar with called Midah Keneged Midah, with regard to Shaul. This is on the bottom of 167, going on to 168. According to the Gemara in Yuma, on Daf Chav Beis, Shaul HaMelech had what you would call unjustified rachmanos. And I mention this as a contemporary issue because there are still voices today that say that despite the cruelty of our enemies, we have to be Rahmanin. We have to have pity on the Amalekim, and be compassionate, which is really the mistake of Shaul HaMelech. But we have people who are still voicing that opinion. Anyway, that's on the side. So what did Shaul HaMelech argue? Shaul HaMelech said, even though he got a mandate through Shmuel, Vehemis mi ish ad isha mi olel, v'ad yonek mi shar v'ad sem mi kamal v'ad chamor. Nevertheless, he learned the Kal V'chomer from the parsha of Egla Rufa. Uma nefesh achas omer Torah havei Egla Rufa. For the loss of one, right? We found a slain body. We have a whole parsha of Egla Rufa. Is kol hanefashos halalu alachas kam v'kama. Im Adam chata, behema machatim, gdolim chatu, ketanim chatu, and so forth and so on. The Gemara goes through a whole bunch of arguments of Shaul to justify the fact that he didn't fulfill his mandate and destroy Amalek. Then the Gemara says that Shaul Amalek violated the principle of Altia Tzadik Harbe. Don't be too righteous, self-righteousness. So again, we're talking about misplaced Rachmanus on the part of Shaul. And he had Rachmanus on those who are Achzarim, who are cruel, the Amalekim. And where's the Midah Keneged Midah? Shaul HaMelech later in his life, in Perek Chav Beis of Shmuel Aleph, wipes out the city of Nov, Ir Kohen. And the pasuk says, "Vayomer HaMelech lidoeg pogam kohanim ves Nov Ir Kohanim hika lefi charet." So the military leader of Shaul was mandated by Shaul to wipe out the city of Nov Ir Kohanim, and the pasuk testifies that he destroyed lefi cherev meish viad isha meolel viad yonek v'shar v'chabar v'seh. That's exactly word for word what Shmuel had mandated Shaul with regard to Amalek. So we have now a situation in which Shaul, because he's initially guilty at the time of Milchemes Amalek, but being a Rachman and Achzarim, now Shaul becomes an Achzari ala Rachmanin, and he kills an entire city of Khan. And now we could add perhaps what Joe was saying before, that Shaul was killed, right, the Makav Patish, by an Amaleki. And it's no coincidence, because Shaul was guilty vis-a-vis Amalek of unacceptable Rachmanis, as a result of which we have this Ger Amaleki who's now going to kill Shaul. And Shaul is likewise guilty of the most hideous of all his crimes, perhaps even a crime that goes beyond, the lack of destroying Amalek, namely destroying Novir Kohen. So when the pasuk says Vayachmol Shaul va'am al Agag, the Amaleki is going to kill Shaul mitoch Rachmanus. Why? Because the Amaleki says, he's dying over here, let's put him out of his misery. And again, what we're seeing is a punishment, number one, for misplaced Rachmanus, in the case of Shaul sparing Amalek, and the punishment fits the crime, Midah Keneged Midah, he will be killed by a Rachman, namely an Amaleki, because of misplaced Rachmanus. And at the same time, Shaul is guilty of having Achzarius on the Rachman. And I think the end of this section, you'll go through it when you get a chance, because we don't have time, is that we don't use emotional evaluations. We are guided by the Torah, by the mandates of God, and we have to be very precise and very careful about weighing when it's appropriate to have Achzarius, when it's fitting to have Rachmanus. And in Shaul's case, he violated both ends of the spectrum. He had Rachmanus when he was supposed to have Achzarius, and he had Achzarius when he was supposed to have Rachmanus. Okay, then this is where we'll stop for today. we pretty much finished the entire chapter. And David, if you're still here,
Yeah.
maybe I could ask you for next week to, I don't know how far you got, 173, I think you got to.
Yeah.
So we'll go on to 179 and then maybe add 180. Just have I always like to have a far, a skull of the next chapter. So we're really getting heavy into some of the Purim issues.
Right.
And next Wednesday, Mitzvah will be on the same clock,
Okay.
So it'll be 8:15 for you and 8:15 for me. And I just hope I'll be able to find a place, that's quiet. I'm a guest at someone's house, so I have to make sure that I have, all the technology and the internet and all that stuff. But as far as I can tell, my brother-in-law said it'll be fine. So we're good.
How
Okay,
long-
then.
How long are you in North America for?
I'm not sure because I didn't get an answer to one question, but as is now, Basher Sham, it's from Thursday till Wednesday. In other words, I leave America on a Tuesday, arrive here on a Wednesday. So my trip in Chutzars will be from Friday to Tuesday.
No chance of coming north to the truck place.
It's cold enough in New York. I mean, have Rachmanis.
So where in New York going to be?
On the Lower East Side of Manhattan,
Okay.
on Grand Street.
Yep, I know where it is.
This is one of the most, if not the most ancient Jewish community in the whole of America. But today,
Yeah.
If you're not Asian,
Exactly. Yep.
and Baruch Hashem, the Asians are very quiet people. And you know that from Canada. Sometimes I think Canada is Asian. I don't know.
Parts that are.
But the Asians are very quiet. So
Oh.
my son graduated medical school at Einstein, my son Baruch, and he said half the class were Asians. They were excellent. They were incredible students. They're like professional students.
70% of the students in the New York City specialized high schools are Asian. Schools like Bronx Science and Stuyvesant, 70% Asian.
Thank God for the Asians. I mean, I'm not so excited about COVID, but I don't know if that's COVID may be an import from somewhere in Asia. I don't know, but
Exactly.
China.
In the Sia Tova.
thank you so much. All the best.
Goes
Thank you so much.
Shkoyach.
Shkoyach.